Hello, my name is Edward and this is my sad story. I am 55 years old, but the calendar is kinder than the mirror. In the mirror, my face looks like a ledger written in rain. Decades of line items, most of them paid in full, none of them acknowledged. For almost 20 years, I lived with a woman named Susan in a small Oregon town stitched together by fog and fir trees. We never married. I told myself it was a technicality, a missing stamp on a parcel that had already arrived. We shared keys, groceries, winters, the stubborn ritual of Sunday coffee. I thought that was what a family was, habits that outlast the seasons. Susan had 2 sons, Thomas and Oliver. Their father, Jack, was a roomer with a driver's license. He existed the way a mirage exists, clearly from a distance, blurry up close, vanishing when you reached for him. On holidays he arrived as a voice, light as breath through a phone. In summer he might appear for an hour in a borrowed truck, promising fishing trips that would be postponed until memory did the postponing for him. He was the biography they preferred even when the pages were blank. I was the one who stayed. I learned the schedules. Early band practice, late soccer games, the time it took to reach the school from our driveway when the county decided again that potholes were a form of traffic calming. I knew which teacher wrote long emails and which coach waited by the gate after practice to make sure someone, anyone, showed up. In the rain-damp bleachers, I clapped for boys who looked past me toward the parking lot, hoping a ghost would materialize behind the headlights. When no one came, I drove them home. I repaired the same chain on Thomas's bike 3 times because he thought hills were a dare rather than a warning. I taught Oliver how to check oil and coolant, standing over the open hood in our cracked driveway while wind from the coast pushed clouds inland like sheep. I covered the invisible bills, the ones that arrive as quiet threats. Premiums, deductibles, copays, deposits, late fees. Their phones were my name. Their car insurance was my name. Oliver's tuition login, the one with the balance that kept resetting to numbers that soured my stomach, was my name. Names matter in households. My name carried weight only when something needed paying. People in town mistook me for their father. At parent-teacher night, a counselor said, "They're lucky to have you, Mr. Shepherd," and the words felt like a jacket 2 sizes too big, warm, flattering, not really mine. At the fall fundraiser, a man I barely knew put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Your boys are good kids." My boys. I let the phrase settle on my tongue and dissolve there. It tasted like something sweet you're not supposed to eat. Inside the house, titles were trickier. Edward was a doorstop. It held a space open without closing another. Sometimes I thought I heard Dad in the next room, and my heart rose like a bird startled into flight. Then I realized they were on speakerphone with Jack, laughing at a memory that didn't include me. I would stand there in the hall with a bag of groceries and let the moment pass. Groceries go bad if you hold them too long. So do hopes. I was careful with my voice. I kept it low, steady, the way you speak to animals you don't want to startle. I thought respect could be grown like a garden, watered daily, weeded quietly, harvested late. I believed, with the stubborn faith of a man who works with his hands, that consistency would wear down resistance the way water shapes stone. When the boys were sullen, I told myself adolescence was a storm and our house would still be standing when the sky cleared. When Susan stayed silent, I told myself it was exhaustion, not indifference. When the town mistook me for Dad, I let the mistake breathe. Maybe, if left alone, it would become true. Evenings had their choreography. Shoes in a heap by the door. Backpacks spilled like open mouths. The fridge opening and closing, the hum deeper after it swallowed new weight. I cooked on weeknights because habit is a form of prayer. Pasta, roasted chicken, the salmon deal from the co-op when the season was generous. I set the table with the careful precision of a man who wants order to be contagious. Forks aligned, glasses evenly spaced. Sometimes they ate without looking up, scrolling with their thumbs like miners in a tunnel hunting for light. Sometimes they said thanks to the room and I took it as mine. I kept a small notebook in the junk drawer. Not for grievances, though it could have become that. It was for lists, oil change, soccer cleats, Oliver's rent due, Thomas's field trip, Susan's dentist, fix the gate latch, call the registrar, buy more salt for the winter that everyone swears won't come but always does. The page filled, I flipped. The stack thickened, I bound it with a rubber band. That little bundle, ink, dates, checks and arrows, was the shape of my contribution. You couldn't frame it. You couldn't post it. No one liked a list unless it was a grocery list they didn't have to write. I tried to pass along SK*LLS instead of sermons. How to drive in fog, low beams, not high. How to carry an apology like something breakable, 2 hands, steady steps. How to listen for the problem under the problem, the way a mechanic listens for the sound a customer can't name. Some nights the teaching landed. Most nights, it slid off like rain on oiled wood. Okay, they'd say, which is the teenage word for we're done here. Jack existed around the edges like unfinished wallpaper. There was always a strip of him somewhere, peeling, visible, impossible to ignore. When he called, their faces brightened, and I felt the petty pucker of jealousy, the way you do when someone praises a man you know won't carry the sofa when the stairs are narrow. On Oliver's 17th birthday, a card arrived with $50 and a promise of a camping trip, soon. We laughed about the 50 because it was easier than crying about the promise. Oliver tucked the bill into his wallet. He kept the card on his dresser for months. I learned not to throw away faith even when it spoils. The house had a sound I can't explain. Some mixture of dryer tumbling denim, water ticking in pipes, the distant murmur of voices layered with the television's endless glow. It was the sound of a life that looked correct from the curb. We had the porch light with the yellow glass, the battered mailbox with the tilting flag, the yard that never quite decided if it wanted to be lawn or clover. Neighbors waved and I waved back. In small towns we waved to confirm we still exist. If there were early cracks, I learned to walk around them. The boys talked about Jack like a legend with a flexible schedule. He knew the best shortcut to the coast. He could fillet a salmon in 3 strokes. He told the funniest story about a flat tire outside Klamath Falls. I didn't compete. You can't outbid a ghost. You only pay and keep paying until your pockets are empty and the receipt says balance due. I measured time by repairs. Winter, the leaking gutter, the upstairs window that stuck like a swallowed lie. Spring, the fence that leaned toward the neighbor's lilac as if tired of its own yard. Summer, the AC that rattled at night like someone knocking from inside the wall. Fall, the roof, always the roof, shingles coming loose like teeth. I fixed what I could and hired out what I couldn't. I kept receipts in a folder labeled house, a word that felt loyal and disloyal at once. I don't know when the word family started feeling like a suit I wore only in company. Maybe the day a cashier said, "Your boys are growing up fast," and I smiled while realizing I had no claim if they decided to slow down without me. Maybe the evening Susan told a story about when Jack and I took the boys to Crater Lake, and the boys corrected a detail I had never been granted the right to remember. Maybe it was simpler, a Tuesday when Thomas brushed past me in the hall and said nothing, and the nothing landed with the weight of a verdict. Still, I kept showing up because showing up was the only card in my hand. I believed effort could mature into acceptance the way vinegar matures into a flavor some people learn to love. I thought if I accumulated enough ordinary days, the ledger would tilt in my favor. I waited for the moment when one of them would say, "Thanks," and the word would be addressed to me, not the room, not the air, not the abstract idea of adulthood. "Thanks, Edward." 2 words and a name. A small ceremony. A flag planted on a hill I had climbed for years. It didn't happen. Not then. Not in that beginning that already contained its ending. Instead, there was a silence that grew roots. A politeness that felt like snow. Pretty from a distance, deadly if you live in it long enough. Susan's eyes learned to slide past conflict, the way you learn to step over a loose board you never get around to fixing. The boys learned that I would drive them where they needed to go even if they forgot to ask, that I would pay even if they forgot to say please, that I would forgive even if they forgot to pretend they were sorry. So I kept the engine warm. I kept the card on file. I kept the door unlocked. I kept the list. I kept the house breathing. And at night, when the rooms finally quieted and the heater clicked like a sleepy animal, I lay awake beside the woman I loved and listened to the sound of a family I was holding together with my hands. It sounded like something fragile in another room. It sounded like glass cooling in a kiln. It sounded like an illusion learning to call itself real. The years didn't pass so much as they eroded me. Not quickly, not violently, but grain by grain, like water chewing through rock until one day the shape is gone and only the hollows remain. I told myself that giving was the same as loving, that sacrifice was the highest form of devotion. But sacrifice without recognition becomes a slow form of disappearance. It began with money as it always does. Oliver was accepted into college, tuition, housing, meal plan, laptop, deposits. I paid every invoice that arrived, each one heavier than the last. I remember the email from the bursar's office, how coldly polite it was, like a machine pretending to say thank you. I didn't mind at first. A father pays, I thought. A father provides. The title may not be mine, but the duty is. Then Thomas got his license. Susan insisted we buy him a car. Something safe, she said, as if safety could be purchased like a luxury trim. I signed the check, insured it under my name, and reminded him to drive carefully. He rolled his eyes. "Relax, Edward. It's not like I'm your kid." It was meant as a joke, maybe. But jokes have a way of carving truths we're too polite to say outright. I laughed because not laughing would have exposed the wound. Outside, the neighbors smiled at us. They saw the image of a family and mistook it for the thing itself. "You've done well," one said as we unloaded groceries from the trunk. "Two fine young men. You must be proud." I nodded. Pride is easy to fake when no one checks the inventory. Inside, things began to shift. The boys no longer spoke to me except in transactions. Gas money, phone plans, weekend trips. I was no longer part of their sentences, only the punctuation at the end of a request. The words please and thank you grew rare, like coins in a jar already raided too often. When I asked for small things, a mowed lawn, a washed dish, I became an inconvenience, a static in their signal. "Ask Mom," they'd say without looking up. Aunt Susan, in her weary mercy, would ask me to let it go. "They're just young," she said. "You know how boys are." I did. I was one once, careless, thoughtless, selfish in that confident way youth allows. But I had also been taught that walls stand only when someone respects the foundation. In our home, respect had become a decorative word, something you hang on a wall but never touch. There were moments when I tried to reclaim the illusion. I planned small trips, hiking weekends, fishing at the coast, movie nights. At first they'd agree, distracted, half listening. Then when the day arrived, they'd vanish with friends or cancel through Susan. "They're busy," she'd say. "You can't take it personally." But I did take it personally. Every cancellation was a subtraction. Every empty chair at the dinner table a little theft of warmth. I remember one winter when Oliver came home from college. He arrived with the scent of beer and distance. His hugs were brief, his eyes already on the exit. He spoke about classes, about parties, about people I didn't know. When I asked about his grades, he sighed, annoyed. "Why do you always have to make everything about responsibility?" Because responsibility was the only language I had left. That Christmas, Jack sent a card, late of course. Inside was a photograph of him at some tropical resort, tanned and smiling, arms around a woman half his age. He'd written, "Wish you were here, boys." No money, no explanation, just a promise of a life better lived elsewhere. Susan placed it on the mantel beside our family photo. I didn't protest. Some ghosts need altars. That night, I sat by the window watching snow fall through the porch light. The world looked clean from a distance, but up close every flake carried dirt from the road. I thought about the years behind us, the bills paid, the birthdays organized, the long nights spent fixing what others broke, and realized none of it had accumulated into gratitude. Only expectation. The more I gave, the less they saw me. I tried to talk to Susan about it. "Do you ever think," I asked one night, "that I'm the only one here who feels this house getting heavier?" She looked at me with tired affection, the kind reserved for complaints she's heard before. "You worry too much," she said. "You give too much of yourself, Edward." Maybe that's the problem. Maybe. But love without giving is only sentiment. The turning point arrived quietly, disguised as a family vacation. Susan wanted to take the boys to Crater Lake. "It'll be good for us," she said. "A little air, a little peace." I agreed. I wanted to believe in the word us again. The morning of the trip, I packed the car. Food, blankets, camera, the same old optimism. The drive was long, the conversation short. Oliver wore headphones. Thomas scrolled his phone. Susan hummed softly to a song I couldn't hear. The silence between us grew thick enough to touch. At the lake, we spread a blanket near the edge and ate sandwiches while the wind carried our words away. When I asked Thomas to help clean up, he pretended not to hear. I repeated myself, gently at first, then firmer. He sighed, exaggerated, that theatrical exhaustion unique to the young. "Why don't you just do it? You're better at that stuff anyway." Oliver laughed. Susan looked away. Something inside me tilted. "Thomas," I said quietly, "you can at least help." He turned, smiling without warmth. "Relax, Edward. You're not my dad." Oliver's laughter joined his. It wasn't cruel, not intentionally, that's what made it worse. Cruelty implies intent. This was indifference, and indifference is colder than hate. Susan's silence sealed it. She could have said one word, enough, but she didn't. She just started gathering the plates herself, as if efficiency were a cure for humiliation. The lake was stunning that day, still, deep, blue as eternity. I remember thinking that if beauty could forgive, this would be the place. But beauty doesn't forgive. It only reflects. And what I saw in that reflection was a man who had spent half his life trying to earn a place that was never his. The drive home was quiet. Thomas fell asleep in the back seat, Oliver stared out the window, Susan hummed again. I kept my eyes on the road, hands tight on the wheel. The silence wasn't tension anymore. It was clarity. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The refrigerator hummed like a machine trying to comfort me. I looked at the photos on the wall, all those smiles that had cost so much to maintain. I thought about the phrase people use, blended family. It sounds soft, but blending is what you do to fruit that's already breaking down. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, though I barely drink. The amber light caught in the liquid like memory itself, bright, trapped, deceptive. For years, I had convinced myself that patience would be repaid, that quiet endurance would earn recognition. But families built on gratitude are fragile. The moment gratitude fades, nothing holds them together. I thought of the lake again, its impossible stillness, its perfect symmetry. They say it was formed when a mountain collapsed into itself. A violent implosion followed by centuries of silence. The metaphor was too obvious to ignore. That night, something in me collapsed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet implosion of belief. I looked around the kitchen, the bills stacked neatly by the fridge, the to-do list pinned with a magnet, the chair where Susan sat reading every morning, the worn floor beneath my feet, and realized the truth I'd been avoiding. I didn't live in a family. I lived in a structure built on my labor and their absence. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt the hollow where love should have been. It wasn't hatred that filled it or anger. Just emptiness, pure, clean, silent. The kind of emptiness that waits patiently for what comes next. I didn't know it then, but the man who sat at that table, staring into his half-empty glass, wasn't the same man who would wake up the next morning. Something had ended. Something had N. The lake inside me had gone still. The decision to withdraw did not come with thunder. It came like a faint click, the sound of a lock turning from the inside. I didn't announce it. I didn't write a speech. I simply woke one morning, poured coffee into my chipped mug, and knew that something had shifted. The same kitchen light that used to feel warm now revealed the dust on the counter. The same house that once seemed full now echoed like an abandoned church. I began small. I canceled the streaming subscriptions. No warning, no explanation. That night, Thomas wandered the living room holding the remote like a relic from a vanished civilization. "Wi-Fi's out?" he asked. I shook my head. "No. Just priorities." He frowned, confused, then shrugged, assuming it was temporary. Entitlement has poor eyesight, it can't see permanence until it's too late. Next came the credit cards, the gas cards, the insurance on Thomas's car. I shut off the quiet arteries that carried money from my account into their comfort. At first they didn't notice. These things take time like frost spreading across glass. Then the calls began. Oliver phoned from college. "Hey, my tuition portal's saying there's a hold. Did you forget the payment?" His tone was casual, even amused, the way you talk to a distracted clerk. "I didn't forget," I said. Silence. "So when will you?" "I won't." Another silence, longer this time. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm finished paying for people who say I'm not family." He laughed, uneasy. "Come on, Edward. Don't be dramatic." I hung up. Some conversations end better without closure. Susan noticed next. "The boys are panicking," she said, her voice caught between concern and accusation. "Thomas's car isn't insured and Oliver's about to lose his classes." I kept sipping my coffee. "Then perhaps they can call their father." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't mean Jack." "Who else would I mean?" "Edward," she said, "you can't just pull the rug out from under them." "They already did," I said. "I'm only moving out of the way." That night, the house vibrated with the sound of outrage. Doors slamming, voices raised, phones ringing into the void. It should have felt like chaos, but to me it sounded like justice. 2 days later, Oliver drove home unannounced. He walked into the kitchen with the confidence of a man entering a bank that owes him money. "We need to talk," he said. "Good," I replied. "Sit down." He didn't. "Look, I get that you're mad, but you can't just stop helping. College isn't free." "No, it isn't." "So what, you're punishing us?" "I'm correcting an error." "Jesus, Edward, we said some things all right? It doesn't mean you get to just." "Yes," I said, interrupting him. "It does." He blinked as if the rules of gravity had suddenly changed. "You're serious." "I'm tired," I said. "That's what serious looks like at my age." He left, muttering something about cruelty, about fairness, about how I was supposed to be the adult. I didn't chase him. I'd spent 20 years chasing ghosts. One more wasn't worth the breath. Thomas reacted differently. Teenagers have a special talent for nizing indifference. He stayed quiet for a week, pretending my existence was a background noise he could ignore. Then one evening his car disappeared. He'd driven it without insurance. The police stopped him for expired tags. They impounded the vehicle. When he called, his voice trembled with the first real emotion I'd heard in months. "They're saying I need proof of coverage. What do I do?" I said, "Ask your dad." He hesitated. "You're my—" "I'm not," I said softly. "You made that clear." He hung up. I sat at the table long after the line went dead, listening to the refrigerator hum. Freedom doesn't sound triumphant. It sounds like loneliness breathing evenly. Susan avoided me for days. She moved through rooms like a ghost afraid to cross my path. When she finally spoke, it was late at night. "They're miserable," she said. "So am I," I answered. "This isn't you," she whispered. "You're not vindictive." "It's not vengeance," I said. "It's alignment. I'm simply letting reality match their words. You can't build a family on punishment. You can't build one on lies either." Her eyes filled with something I didn't recognize, maybe regret, maybe dawning fear. She left the room without another word. The next day I took a walk through town. The people there still greeted me warmly. "How's the family?" someone asked. I smiled. "Under reconstruction." They laughed, assuming it was a joke. In a way it was. Every man trapped in gratitude's shadow becomes a comedian eventually. Weeks passed. The silence in the house thickened. Thomas avoided eye contact. Oliver stopped calling. Susan went through the motions, cooking meals that no one touched. I had become the quiet gravity pulling the household inward, not through authority but through absence. Then came Oliver's wedding. He had planned it for months, a grand affair by the coast, all glass and ceremony. He wanted a ballroom, a string quartet, a tuxedo tailored to a fantasy. All of it floated on the assumption that I would pay. I didn't. The phone rang one night. "Edward, the venue needs a deposit by Friday," Susan said. "Oliver's counting on you." "Counting on me?" I repeated. "He made it clear I'm not part of the count. Don't do this." "I'm not doing anything. I'm simply not paying to watch my own exclusion." Friday passed. The deposit remained unpaid. The glamorous wedding shrank into a rented church basement with flickering lights and folding chairs. The orchestra became a playlist. The tuxedo became a borrowed suit. Oliver's bride cried quietly in the photos, not for love, but for what could no longer be afforded. Jack the idol had promised to come. He didn't. He sent a text instead. "Sorry kid. Work emergency." There was no work. There never was. I watched from the back of the room as Oliver stood beneath the cheap bulbs, his smile thin, his eyes scanning the door. Waiting for a ghost. I almost pitied him. Almost. After the vows, he spotted me and approached with the brittle politeness of someone shaking hands with a creditor. "You came," he said. "I did," I replied. "Wouldn't miss the unveiling." He frowned. "Unveiling? Of truth?" I said. We stood there in silence, two men separated by blood that wasn't ours. Later I slipped out before the cake was cut. I drove home through the wet Oregon dark, the road gleaming like a blade. When I entered the house, Susan was waiting in the living room, still dressed for the occasion. "You embarrassed him," she said. "No," I answered. "Reality embarrassed him. I just stopped financing the illusion." She didn't reply. She just sat down and cried softly as if mourning something she couldn't name. I watched her, and for the first time in years I didn't feel guilt. Only distance. That night, I turned off every light and walked through the house one last time, past the kitchen table, the photos on the wall, the couch where so many silences had sat between us. The air felt lighter. The walls honest. Freedom doesn't arrive with celebration. It arrives with clarity. It looks like a man standing in the dark, finally realizing he doesn't owe anyone his own erasure. I went to bed, knowing morning would bring the same world, but not the same man. The withdrawal was complete. The consequence inevitable. The morning after Oliver's wedding, the house was still, a quiet graveyard of sighs and stale perfume. The leftover flowers wilted in the sink. The air smelled of rain and regret. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the first pale light crawl over the yard, and I knew it was over. Not just the wedding, not just the arguments, but the illusion itself, the whole architecture of pretense I had built with my bare, bleeding hands. Susan came downstairs hours later, her eyes red, her dress from the night before still hanging off her shoulders. She didn't speak at first. She moved like someone crossing a minefield, unsure which word might set me off. "He's hurt," she said finally, her voice small. "You could have helped." "I already did," I said. "For 20 years. That's not what I mean." I know exactly what you mean. You mean I should have kept paying. That's what you always mean. She didn't argue. Her silence was the same silence she had offered every time the boys dismissed me, the silence that had raised them better than any words. For the next few days, the house existed in a strange half-life. Oliver called, but Susan spoke for me. Thomas slammed doors, muttered about betrayal, said things under his breath that he thought I couldn't hear. You ruined everything. You don't know what family means. Maybe I didn't. Maybe none of us did. By the end of the week, I'd made my decision. There was no grand revelation, no spark of anger, only the kind of calm that comes after drowning, the quiet relief of having nothing left to fight for. That morning I packed. Not out of impulse, but precision. I folded my clothes, packed my tools, my papers, my watch, the few things that still felt like mine. I left the furniture, the appliances, the photo frames. Those belonged to the life I'd funded, not the man I'd become. When I finished, I placed the house keys on the table beside a note I wrote on plain paper. Respect cannot be bought. You said I was nothing. Now live without me. The words looked small on the page, but they carried the weight of 2 decades. Susan found me by the doorway as I lifted my bag. Her voice cracked. Edward, please. Don't do this. Do what? I asked. Leave? I've been leaving for years. This is just the first time you noticed. She reached for me. I stepped back. You can't just walk away from family. I smiled, not cruelly but truthfully. What family? She started to cry then, quietly, her shoulders trembling like a broken clock. I wanted to feel pity. Instead, I felt light. I walked out without slamming the door. Portland was gray that morning, the kind of gray that softens everything, even regret. I found a small apartment by the river, a 1-bedroom with thin walls and a view of the water. The landlord handed me the keys without asking questions. People in cities don't ask. They recognize the look of someone trying to start over. The first night, I slept on a mattress on the floor. The rain tapped against the window like an old friend, familiar and unjudging. I unpacked slowly, each item a confession. My clothes, my notebooks, a few tools and one photograph. Oliver and Thomas's boys holding fishing rods by the creek, smiles wide, sunlight catching their faces. I placed it on the windowsill and turned it face down. In the silence, I found something close to peace. Not happiness, I no longer believed in that fragile word, but the raw quiet of freedom. Susan called on the 3rd day. I let it ring out. She left a message. Please, Edward. Come home. The boys didn't mean what they said. Oliver wants to talk. Thomas feels terrible. We can fix this. Fix. The word echoed. Fixing was all I had ever done. The leaks, the bills, the broken pride of others. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to end. By the 5th day, her tone had changed. You made your point, she said. We can start again. But you can't just abandon us. Abandon. That's what they called it when I stopped subsidizing their contempt. Oliver wrote an email a week later. It was long, rambling, full of apologies that never quite touched the truth. I was angry. I didn't realize what I said would hurt you like that. Things got out of hand. Maybe we could meet for coffee? I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. Some bridges are better left as ashes. The weeks blurred. Work filled the daylight. Solitude filled the rest. I began walking every evening along the river, watching reflections bend and break on the current. I thought about the years behind me, the ones spent waiting for gratitude that never came. Waiting for a word, a gesture, anything that might have made the giving worthwhile. I realized then that love without respect isn't love at all. It's servitude dressed in tenderness. And I had been its willing slave. Sometimes I caught myself rehearsing old arguments in my head, what I could have said, what I should have done. But the voices faded faster each night. Distance has a way of cleaning the soul. 2 months later, Susan sent a letter. Handwritten. The envelope smelled faintly of her perfume, that mix of lavender and guilt. Edward, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that things have changed. The boys finally understand. Oliver's been working extra hours to pay off his loans. Thomas is trying to rebuild the car he lost. They talk about you more than they admit. I think they miss you. I miss you. Please write back. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in a drawer, and closed it. Understanding doesn't erase history. It only confirms what's already dead. Sometimes I sit on the balcony with a glass of bourbon and watch the lights ripple across the river. There's a small bar nearby where people laugh too loudly, and their joy drifts up like smoke. I listen not out of envy but curiosity. It amazes me how easily people assume love is permanent, how carelessly they believe that effort guarantees belonging. In truth, family is not built from blood or promises. It's built from recognition, the simple act of saying, I see you, I value you, I choose you. Without that, every gesture is charity. I think about Susan sometimes. About the nights we shared, the mornings we survived, the illusion we built out of routine. I don't hate her. Hate requires energy and I've already spent mine. I just wish she had spoken once, just once, when silence was the knife that cut deepest. I imagine Oliver and Thomas grown older, sitting somewhere years from now, remembering the man who kept their lights on. Maybe they'll talk about me with a trace of regret. Maybe not. But I know this much. The world has a way of collecting its debts. Sooner or later they'll learn what it costs to live without respect. When the river darkens at dusk, I see my reflection in it, tired, yes, but whole. For the first time in decades, my life belongs entirely to me. I whisper sometimes, not as prayer, not as curse, but as closure. Love without respect is slavery. And then quieter still. I am free.